Hello everyone. This is the first of maybe part 2 or part 3 in our discussion of the chapter on religion. This is reading number 17, the last reading that we'll cover, and it's chapter 12 from your textbook. Now remember, we're looking at religion from an anthropological perspective. We'll talk more about what that means later. But don't forget cultural relativism. No one religion is assumed to be the standard by which others are judged. So the important thing here is the functionality of religions. How do they work in their given cultural context? Anthropologists don't really get into theological issues like the nature of God and does God exist and what happens to us after we die and so forth. All right, on the very first page, in the first paragraph, there are 3 what I would call motivators of religiosity. Religiosity is the quality of being religious. And there you find it right in the middle of that paragraph: finitude, mortality, and uncertainty. And in my mind, we can attribute the origins of religion, whenever that was, to at least one or possibly all 3 of these things. Finitude, of course, is the notion that humans are finite creatures with no ultimate control over our destiny. Mortality, of course, is death, and the uncertainty and all the problems that brings with it. And then uncertainty just describes our relationship to the physical world, which, remember, in, let's say, prehistoric times was much greater than it is today. So anyway, so the 3 ancient motivators of religiosity: finitude, mortality, and uncertainty. Next, we take on a definition of religion. Not the easiest thing to do, because for one thing, people tend to define religions in such a way that is familiar to them. And that's not going to help us very much. There are 10,500 of them, and they differ greatly. In fact, there's no universal consensus when it comes to religious matters, just by virtue of the fact that 10,500 different quote-unquote answers to the problems of uncertainty exist. We'll look at a couple of scholars that have attempted to give us definitions. Edward Tyler, a few paragraphs in his work Primitive Culture, you can see that he defines religion as belief in spiritual beings, which is not bad. Not bad. Unfortunately, it doesn't work for some religions. There are some Buddhists, Theravada Buddhists, who really don't worship or pray to gods. They recognize gods, but they're just not that important. You can say the same thing about Jainism and Taoism. But not a bad definition for the 19th century. He also gave us the notion of animism. And he surmised that the earliest religions, the oldest ancient religions, were animistic. And you can read what that is right there. It says the idea that all living things and inanimate things as well are imbued with a spiritual force or essence. So think of the Native American sacred lakes, sacred hills, things of that nature. Looking at the sun, as Egyptians did, as a divine being. That's all examples of animism. Next, we discuss Emil Durkheim, and you see his definition. Now, Durkheim was a sociologist, and oh, by the way, he was also an atheist. He did make a big deal out of it, but he almost accepted that as just a fact of the human condition. but he was an atheist. And he nevertheless saw that religion played a very important role in people's lives. Look at his definition. Religion is, quote, a unified set of beliefs and practices relative to sacred things, that is to say, things set apart and forbidden, beliefs and practices which unite one single moral community, all those who adhere to them. So you can see where his emphasis is. Religion is, in a few words, a social glue. It sort of binds people together in one common ethical enterprise. You can skip a couple lines and read where it says Durkheim's concern was with the social activity of individuals, not whether or not the religious dogma and tenets that guided them were valid. And I say, besides, he was an atheist, right? So he wasn't really concerned at all with the particular religious beliefs and the religious claims made by people. He was looking at religion as a social phenomenon. And that is very much how social scientists, including anthropologists, look at religion. The next definition we'll talk about was given to us by Paul Tillich. Skip down a few paragraphs. You can see I have a quote from him. According to Tillich, religion is the largest, I'm messing up his quote here. Religion, in the largest and most basic sense of the word, is ultimate concern. So he used two words, ultimate concern, as his definition of religion. And some problems arose because some people pointed out, well, what if someone's ultimate concern is, for example, LSU football or Nazism or whatever? And the critique was that, how can we call these things religious? Well, you'll note if you read a little bit further that Tillich sort of qualified his definition by telling us that if there is some concern that is a worldly concern, but yet someone considers that to be an ultimate concern, then he would label that as idolatrous. It's the last sentence in the paragraph below the block quote. So these things would be idolatrous and not properly religious. And so that's how he counter-argued that critique. Then I give you my definition. You can read it right there. Religion is a coherent system of culture, patterns, symbols, etc., etc. And then as you can see, I break down the religion piece by piece. So let's do that. The first segment of the definition, my definition, is religion is a coherent system, ... And you'll see a chart, Eastern religions and Western religions. And what I've done there is I've shown you how all the various components of these religions all sort of hang together and work together to give us a coherent system. So the Eastern religions, look at all of those traits or characteristics taken as a whole, they all work together. And what I mean by that is this. In Eastern religions, the real, by the way, I'm using the term the real because that's a good culture-free term for whatever it is people consider to be the highest spiritual power. Christians may call it God. Hindus may call it Brahman. Jews may call it Jehovah. Right, but whatever is the real in a particular culture. And in Eastern religions, it's immanent. In other words, it's here with us and ubiquitous, widespread. And also, too, it's inside us. The real is inside us and widespread. And so, therefore, next characteristic, adherents look inward for liberation, right? I mean, since God is inside us, we look inside for God. And by the way, note we talk about liberation in the Eastern context versus salvation in the Western context. To continue, if God is inside and we're looking inside, well, it makes sense that we would use meditation to do that, because meditation is what gets us in touch with our true selves. The concern is with silencing the ego, because the idea is that the ego is the noise, quote unquote, that stands between ourselves and a true realization of the real. So we need to silence that ego. One lives many lives until he or she attains liberation. So you might say, well, this seems to be difficult. Silencing the ego, realizing God within us, yes, but you have many lifetimes to accomplish it. And then finally, liberation must be earned. It's the person themselves and their efforts that will win them liberation, and liberation meaning liberation from this world. So that's how you can do the same exercise with the Western religions. So point being, all these things all hang together in a very coherent way. Now please pay careful attention to the text here, because I'm skipping over a lot of it, but it will help you grasp what I'm getting at here. I do want to note that near the bottom of this discussion of the first segment, you'll note that it's in parentheses. It's right above the heading of culturally patterned symbols, practices, and ideology. Right above that heading, you can see in parentheses the term mythology is used by anthropologists to refer to lore and legends of a particular culture that serve to teach important principles and provide the justification for certain beliefs and tenets of that culture. Right? So they are profound. They are thought to sort of teach important truths, important cultural truths, but then no assumptions are made whether or not the events described actually happened, although in most cases it's believed they did not. So a perfect example would be the Eve and Adam story in the Garden of Eden. That's a perfect example of mythology. Important cultural truths can be learned from that mythology, but certainly we don't believe that those things actually happened historically. Okay, second segment of culturally patterned symbols, etc. Symbols are important because of the nature of religious ideology. Look at the third paragraph. Symbols are a necessary component of religion, since that which religions point to is beyond the sphere of everyday interaction and is not like anything else in the mundane world. Thus, something is needed to point towards these otherworldly and in many cases ineffable, that means can't be put into words, ineffable phenomena, and in order to do this in a workable fashion, there must be a collective agreement regarding what the signs are, in other words, the symbols, signify. In other words, symbols must be cultural. There's no such thing as an individual symbol. So that's symbols. Next, I talk about practice, and you can read there, it's through practice that people actually learn about their religion. They learn important tenets, the mythology of the faith, and so through practice people learn a lot about their religion. And then finally, ideology, next paragraph, you'll see where I write ideology is perhaps the most fundamental component, because it is not derivative. The other two are derivative. Symbols are derivative. Practices are derivative. In other words, they both come from something else, but ideology gives us the foundation of symbols and practices. A little bit about the religious way of thinking. Next paragraph, third line, the word epistemology means a way of thinking. So the religious epistemology is faith-based, right? So it's not data-based, it's faith-based. And what does that mean? Well, the beliefs and claims are embraced in the absence of confirming evidence. Excuse me. In fact, that's what faith is. To embrace something, to believe in something, without there being confirming evidence for that something. Also, too, religious epistemology is exclusively deductive, which means that they embrace certain ideas, but they're not tested. And then finally, they're aempirical, excuse me, they're aempirical, since data collection and testing are irrelevant. And then finally, skip a couple lines down, and remember, since religious claims are non-falsifiable, they are not vulnerable to testing and critique. So basically, religion is trying to do almost the impossible. It's trying to attain knowledge regarding a realm, a supposed realm, that exists totally beyond our realm of experience. So in a kind of way, religion is hard, whereas science is easy. Science actually focuses on the things of this world, the things that we can experience and test and observe. So that is one of the reasons why I say that religion is hard. What religion is trying to do is quite difficult. Last paragraph there before the next heading, religion is the only human endeavor that at least attempts to deal with the issue of meaning and purpose. And that's true. It's the only game in town in regard to meaning and purpose. Science doesn't do meaning and purpose, but religion does. And continue reading, if religious ideology can be so easily critiqued, and it can be easily critiqued, it's largely because religion is attempting to do the impossible. It attempts to describe in a definitive and authoritative manner phenomena that inhabit, occur, and originate in a realm that is literally preternatural, or in other words, beyond the corporal world that we inhabit. Few can lead productive and emotionally stable lives in the absence of a culturally sanctioned greater meaning and purpose, and so they overlook the troubling epistemological issues, namely all the things I just pointed out, if they think about them at all, because religion is the only game in town. So maybe one explanation regarding why people tend to be religious, even though there are so many problems with religion. Next heading, whereby cultural conceptions of the paranormal aspects of human existence might be expressed. Here, largely I focus on the term supernatural. You'll note that my definition does not use the term supernatural. Instead, I use paranormal, which just means something just a bit beyond the normal, which is something in our realm of experience. But supernatural is problematic. I note a couple reasons why. First of all, the term differs from culture to culture. Also, too, in some cultures it has no meaning because to them the natural world and the supernatural world are one and the same. And then there are some philosophical objections to the term that you can see in James Lett's critique. Particularly look at his block quote. Read all of his, there's two different parts to his block quote. Please read through those, because he argues that the term supernatural is nonsensical. So as I said, please read through those very carefully. He gives us reasons why. And so I've chosen to avoid that problematic term. And then the last thing I note in regard to my definition is that you'll note that I use the term cultural and culturally a few times, and that's done to drive home the point that religion is quintessentially a cultural phenomenon, as evidenced by the fact that around 10,500 different and largely contradictory versions exist, but each one being tailored uniquely to meet the needs of people who share specific history, language, and culture.